Okay, great. We're going to start on time because we have a lot of good content to cover. But don't worry, we're going to record this session. So if you miss anything, you can watch the recording afterwards. So let's start. So hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Veronica, and I'm a marketing manager at Marosa. So just before we start, I would like to remind you of our housekeeping rules. So as I mentioned, this session is going to be recorded, and after the webinar, we're going to send you the video, including the presentation slides. If you have any questions or you need any clarification, just please use chat or Q&A function, and we will address them at our dedicated session. So Miguel, if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned, the housekeeping rules. We're going to cover key aspects of improving your VAT compliance processes, reducing manual work, automating repetitive tasks, and just reducing costs. And as you can see today, I'm joined with my colleague Miguel. He's our tax technology expert. He's leading the development tasks to improve the automation of VAT compliance process and helping clients move to VAT compliance tools. He has more than 25 years in the IT development and more than 7 years in tax technology industry. And he has an excellent knowledge in real-time reporting in Spain, Portugal, Hungary, Poland, but also in e-invoicing in Europe. So let's dive into it. Miguel, the floor is yours, and I'll take care of the recording. Thank you.
Thank you for your intro, Veronica. Thank you all for attending this webinar on the use of Alteryx in the VAT compliance process. Let's start. The aim of this webinar is to show you the use, capabilities, and power of Alteryx as an ETL tool in the VAT compliance process. First, I will start with a brief overview of the VAT compliance process, which many of you already know. I will emphasize the main task of the process and identify one of the main risks that exists during its execution. Then, I will give a brief presentation of the data extraction and preparation phase, crucial in the process of preparing VAT returns, the difficulties and risks that may arise, and what alternatives exist to mitigate these potential risks using automation tools. Third, I will introduce Alteryx as an ETL solution that allows automating data extraction and preparation. Finally, I will show you 2 success stories of using Alteryx both in the VAT compliance process and in the real-time reporting. Finally, questions. Let's start with a common VAT compliance process overview. Most of you are already familiar with the VAT compliance process. Basically, from a high-level perspective, we can simplify it in the following phases. Data extraction from heterogeneous sources, like databases, ERPs, files, etc., or several of them at once. Then, to prepare and transform the data, as most of the tools do not allow us to extract the data in a clean and ready-to-use way, therefore, we will need to, for example, calculate amounts, apply formulas, merge with other files, delete data, manually input others, and many others. In other words, several tasks, many of them manual. Then, once we have the data prepared, we continue with the VAT return preparation. And finally, the process ends with the submission. So, making an analogy, we can say that the VAT compliance process is like cooking a recipe, from obtaining and preparing ingredients, in our case, extracting, preparing, and transforming the data, to completing the dish, in our case, the VAT return. Having seen this process, we can identify one of the main risks, the data extraction and preparation. Why? Because it's often necessary to perform multiple manual tasks, like calculating amounts, applying formulas, performing validations, manual inputs, etc. These manual tasks carry an inherent risk, being manual. And well, we all know the risk that this causes: errors during the execution, oversights, forgetfulness, incorrect executions. Therefore, If we want to mitigate this risk, one of the most effective ways is the use of VAT compliance tools, which introduce security and control in the execution of the process by automating, as far as possible, the tasks that need to be carried out. Now, let's focus on this risk during the data extraction and preparation. Well, sometimes there is difficulty in introducing VAT compliance tools due to numerous reasons, but with a common denominator: the difficulty in extracting and preparing the data. When having multiple data sources or multiple files of formats, for example, Excel, JSON, and XML files, the manual application of rules like adding and removing rows and columns, non-normalized data, the lack of tools to prepare the data, or even not enough resources to develop the automation. So, well, these difficulties can lead to risk if you keep the process manual, the manual work itself, process not clearly defined when it's not well documented, isolated knowledge, for example, if the responsible of the VAT compliance process leaves the team, error transforming the data, like errors applying the data manipulation, complex traceability, not being easy to understand what has been done, and difficulties to identify and solve errors. So let's see now how the use of Alteryx to automate the data extraction and preparation can help us to eliminate these difficulties, reduce risk, and allow the use of VAT compliance tools. How? With these benefits. By removing or reducing the manual work, the process becomes totally or partially automated. The process will be well and clearly defined. It will be easier to maintain or to implement new rules. The reduction of the cost when preparing the VAT returns, and it can also be integrated between the data source and the VAT compliance tool without manual intervention. Let's see the most common alternatives. In the first row, we can see different alternatives from traditional to most modern tools. And the first column, we can see the benefits identified in the previous slide. So let's see which benefits are satisfied by each solution. As you can see, with manual conversions, none of the benefits are satisfied. With Excel formulas and macro, we can satisfy partially the automation and the cost reduction, but we cannot satisfy all of them. Of course, companies can also implement their own tools that can satisfy some of the benefits, depending on the completeness and automation level. Finally, we can introduce Alteryx. With Alteryx, all of these benefits can be satisfied. Now let's see Alteryx as an ETL solution. But first of all, what are ETL tools? Well, ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. It's a process used to collect data from various sources, extract, convert it into a usable format, transform, and send it into a target database, data warehouse, or system, load. In simple terms, and following our initial analogy, it's like preparing the ingredients data for a recipe, analysis, or reporting. So basically, ETL improves tasks of the VAT compliance process, as it helps ensure the data is accurate, complete, and ready for analysis. Let's deep inside the three phases of the ETL process. Extract. The data is gathered from different sources, such as databases, file, or applications like ERP, accounting systems, and many others. Transform. Extracted data is now cleaned, organized, and converted into a standard format to ensure consistency and usability. For example, following the requirements of an Excel template. And finally, load. The transformed data is then loaded into a destination system where it can be used later. For example, inserting in another database or system, sending by FTP, calling an external API, sending by email, uploading to a cloud service, etc. So, if you are doing manual work in Excel, it can be automated with Alteryx. All manual work, yes, as long as it is repetitive. So now let's see why and where can we use Alteryx to automate our manual and repetitive work. But what is Alteryx? Let's focus on Alteryx as an ETL tool. Alteryx is a powerful ETL and data analytics platform designed to simplify and streamline the data preparation and analysis process. So it is not only an ETL tool, but also a data analytics platform. However, we are focusing on its ETL capabilities. To provide ETL functions, it has a wide range of tools and functionalities, allowing to perform complex data and analysis tasks. With Alteryx, we can easily access, blend, cleanse, and enrich data from multiple sources, including systems, databases, files, and web services, because it has native connectors to different data sources. And finally, Alteryx empowers users to automate repetitive tasks, speed up the analytics process, and make data-driven decisions more efficiently. Here, you can see an Alteryx workflow example. This workflow converts the input data from several Excel files to multiple output Excel files and submit them to a real-time reporting tool. In a few slides, we will see it with more details. But why Alteryx? Now let's compare it with other solutions. It speeds up the workflow development. The workflows are easy to maintain. With its debugging tool, you can analyze and trace errors. It's versatile and easy to integrate with third-party systems. It's commonly used with a large community, so we can find solutions for almost every problem. It has direct and native connections to a wide variety of sources: SAP, Amazon, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, Google, FTP, API, Excel, CSV, JSON files, etc. The workflows can be run automatically based on events, or it can be scheduled. It can be used on a desktop, but it can also run on cloud environments. So you can decide which option suits better for you. For VAT compliance teams, Alteryx can streamline the data preparation process for compliance, ensuring accuracy and efficiency in VAT-related tasks. Focusing on the data sources, here you can see different native connections. On the left, you can see the list of file formats admitted by Alteryx. For example, when we need to extract data from a cloud server, from a shared folder, or from a local folder, for example. But we can also connect directly to the data source, not to a file. For example, on the right, you may see the list of native connections to different services providers like Amazon, Oracle, IBM, SAP, Microsoft, Tableau, and so many others. And of course, it can also be implemented connections to systems that are not in this list. Let's see now two practical cases. Case 1, integration with Verify, our VAT compliance tool. One of our clients needs to send the files to Verify. This file needs to be extracted from their ERP as is, without any conversion, to complete the automation of the VAT compliance process. They could not implement them by themselves, so they have requested us to help them in this part of the process. Let's see the requirements. Multi-entity and multi-spreadsheet files. The files are available in a shared folder. We need to include multiple validation across the preparation, and it's necessary to validate the VAT number in the VS database. Some transactions are related to non-liable tax code that need to be excluded. It is necessary to generate an additional output file with the excluded transactions. The subtotal and totals must be calculated by the workflow, as the input files have the data per lines. If the input file have data from multiple entities, the workflow needs to create one single output file per entity. So simplifying these requirements, we need to do this flow. So in terms of the workflow, we can identify the following task. First, we extract the invoice data from multi-tab Excel files. Then we transfer the input data, including validations. Then we apply mapping of the tax codes from the ERP to verify tax codes. Then we apply VS validation of the VAT numbers. Then we create the output files ready to submit to our VAT compliance tool. Let me show you how this process is developed in Alteryx. Here, this is an overview of the Alteryx workflow. Here, you can see different lines, icons. Every icon is an action of Alteryx, and the line is the path of the flow. We can have one single line or multiple and parallel lines. Let's focus on the workflow. Here, for example, we start reading the file. As you can see, we can read the file from a shared folder. We can find by name, or even we can introduce wildcards. Here, we can have the different data sources. We can search a file, or even we can connect to this list of native connection I mentioned before. These are the default connections we have, but we can implement many others. Here, when we read the file, we clean the column names. We remove the space before and after. Then we clean the input data, because from time to time, not all rows and not all columns are completed. So we remove blank spaces and empty values. Of course, we log all the actions in an output file. So every time we exclude or detect any error, we create a second output file with these errors. I will show you later. Then we identify which invoices are issued and which invoices are received based on a column value. Then we exclude those transactions that could not be identified as invoices issued and received, but we exclude by including in an error file. Okay, this is the part of the workflow where we log all excluded transactions. Here, of course, as I mentioned before, it's very easy to trace errors and to log every action of the workflow. Here, we can see an extract of a sample of the input data, and we can see all the data imported and how it's being converted all along the workflow. Then we create a key to identify every single transactions, because we receive a multi-line file. We select only the columns that are relevant for the rest of the workflow. Here, we make a sign correction, because in subfiles, output transactions comes with the sign reverted. So here, if we are analyzing invoices issued, we do a sign reversion. Then we calculate the total amounts for every single invoice to identify if it's an invoice or a credit note. Then here we do the mapping conversion from the tax code of the client to our list of tax codes. Okay, we do what we call mapping with verified tax codes. So finally, we have all the tax codes from the client. This is the column with the tax code of the client. And at the end, we have the tax code based on the mapping from verify. So as you can see, some of them are empty. So this means that this transaction is not mapped. So here, what we do is check which one of them have not been mapped, and we send to the error file that we will see later. Then here we do the VS validation. So for the transaction that is an intra-community, both input and output, we are going to check if it's in the VS database. But first of all, as we receive the VAT number composed by the country code and the VAT number itself, we need to split. So this is a kind of operation we can do with the input data. We get from one side the VAT number and from another side the country code. But we can do as many others. Then finally we call the European Commission service here, and extract the data. So finally, we will have here the result. Some of them has been validated with true, but some of them no. Why? Because as is a demo, I prepare some dummy VAT numbers to be rejected to show you how we detect that are not valid. Then once this VAT number has been validated, we continue with the main path of the workflow. For those that have not been validated, we do not exclude from the output file we are going to generate. No, we only send to this log file to tell the client, okay, we have included in the output file, but these transactions contain some VAT number that has not been validated by the European Commission service. Then we continue with setting many other columns like invoice number, cleaning this data. For example, we get from reference, but if it's empty, we get from another column, document number, invoice date. We change the dot separator by a slash separator. So we uniform as well the data. And of course, for example, exchange rate, we get 4 decimal places. Then we calculate again the totals per tax code and per tax rate, parse the amounts, and then finally we create the output file. First of all, what we need is, based off our template, we create the output file here. We fill in the spreadsheet with the invoices issued. Then we fill in the invoices received. And then it's like here, we have this example file with some example transactions. That is a SAP file with dummy data, of course. And we are basing on the mapping, we are creating an output file. Okay, let's run. And is it that is manually? For this demo is only manual. Run, and it's very quick. All this now is running and is validating the VAT number in the VS database. From time to time, it takes some time. Okay, and the workflow has been finished. And now here we can find in the output directory 2 files, the error files with the list of errors or any other action that have been traced. For example, these 2 VAT numbers have not been validated in the European Commission service, and these transactions has been excluded because are not mapped, because our client requests us to exclude from the output file. And then here we can see our Excel template filled with the input data, but according to our rules, our tax codes in our format, dates with a slash instead of dots, the invoice number, the currency code, the total amount based on the tax code and the VAT rate, and the rest of data that is available in the input file. And the same approach for invoices received. Okay, this is so simple. Now, let's go with another example. Integration with a real-time reporting system. Okay? In that case, one of our clients needs to send the data to a real-time reporting. So let's see the requirements. First of all, they need to integrate automatically with the real-time reporting, so without manual intervention. They generate multi-entity files and separated files for each type of invoices. So one for invoices issued, one for invoices received. They have hard preparation work that includes several data manipulations and controls. The input data files will be available from cloud services. It's necessary to generate one output file per entity. They have up to 13 different tax codes. We need to exclude non-liable tax codes and other transactions based on certain and specific conditions. We need to include multiple validations and data cleaning. It's necessary to create an additional output file with the excluded transactions. We also need to do calculation of the subtotal and totals operations. And the output file needs to be automatically submitted to our real-time reporting tool. And the results must be reported by email. So as you may see, this process can be schematized in this flow, but this flow appears to be more complex than the previous one. Let's see. So simplifying and making an approach to Alteryx, we can identify and extract action from the invoices received file, extract the invoices issued from another Excel file, extract the movement of own goods from a third file. Invoices issued must be merged with an additional file to identify if it's a supply of services or is a supply of goods. Then we need to transfer the input data, apply the mapping and validations required from our clients, then create the output files, and finally submit to our tool. So let me show you this process in Alteryx. And let me close this one. Okay. Let's see. Okay. The file, this directory is empty at this moment. So the workflow is going to connect to our SharePoint and is going to download these 3 files that has been previously uploaded by our client. So here, this is the full overview of the workflow. As you can see, it's more complex because we need to perform multiple actions, more than the previous example. And here, we will start by getting the data from SharePoint. It will connect automatically and download every single file we found. When the files have been downloaded to our folder, we read the files that contains the invoices received, the invoices issued, and the movement of own goods. The invoices received, we need to, for example, exclude those lines that has no reference and rename some fields to normalize both Excel files because invoices issued and received has different columns and column names. So we normalize two, so we can join in one single file. But for example, for invoices issued, we need to do an additional action. That is to merge with this specific input file that contains the identification for every single invoice, whether it's a supply of goods or a supply of services. Because for the Spanish SII, that is this real-time reporting, for some specific transactions, it's mandatory to split between goods and services. So once we have prepared the initial preparation of the invoices received and invoices issued, we merge and we process in one single line. In parallel, of course, we are processing the movement of our goods, but I will show you later. We make some clean operation here. We clean some columns. We create the header files, for example, with the holder and VAT number, the date of issuance, the accounting record date, the date of issuance, we get the period and the year and the reporting year based on the posting date of every single transaction. We create the output file names because we need to create different files depending on the input data, because we can receive in one single file or multiple files related to different entities. So we need to create maybe multiple files. Then we create the columns related to the counterparty fields. Here, for example, as we need to report in separate fields if is the data related to Spanish customers or suppliers and non-Spanish counterparties, we do some comparisons. For example, if we are talking about if we receive an Spanish VAT number, we report in that column. But if it's not an Spanish VAT number, we report in this column, this column, this column, and finally the ID. Okay, we get some common columns that are valid for all type of transactions. This action is only for demo and testing purposes, so you can ignore this. Then finally, we get only the columns that are relevant for the rest of the flow. So we make some sort of cleaning. Okay, here we have almost everything prepared to do this mapping conversion necessary to report to tax authorities. So here we split between invoices issued and invoices received. Invoices issued, this is the list of tax codes. So previously we do based on an Excel file. Here are doing inside the workflow itself. Okay, these are the demo tax code for invoices issued. For example, this is a domestic sale at the standard rate. So basically we include this data here manually, but we get the rest of the data based on the columns from the input files. And we do the same for the rest of tax codes. Okay, for intra-community supply of goods, we provide here, for example, E5, that's an exception reason required to report to tax authorities with the tax base amount. This is intercommunity supply of services that is out of scope. So we report in another column. Here, export of goods, we report here with code E2 and with taxable base exempt here with the total base amount. And for example, this domestic rear charge, okay? We place here with this code S2 and with the VAT 0, net amount 0, and the, sorry, VAT amount 0 and the net amount. And the same approach with the invoices received, okay? So basically, what I tried to explain to you is that we can do here all the mapping required. Okay? For example, these exclude transactions are logged as in the previous workflow in a separate file. I will show you later. So here, once we have all the transactions mapped, we create a unique key to identify every single invoice, because we always as well receive a file that contains multiple lines per invoice. Here we calculate the total amounts. And finally, we do two paths. One, to get the common data, okay, that goes through this line. And we calculate here the aggregates amounts. So here we do the sum operations of all amounts based on the tax code and the tax rate. We do some clean operations here. Then we concatenate the values because in our template we need to report all the amounts concatenated within the same single line. And finally, we clean the amounts and concatenate again some additional values. Finally, we reorganize the fields to be easier to trace and to fix some any error we can find during the execution. So here you can see all the data normalized and according to our requirements. Then we get some additional data for specific transactions, and we do the split between invoices issued and invoices received. Okay, that goes by these lines. So, but in parallel, I told you before, we run a new line for the movement of own goods. We read this specific file that contains two spreadsheets, invoices issued and invoices received. We get the data. We classify it as invoices as issued and received. We merge, and then we do some, we calculate some fields, the common fields for these specific transactions, and we launch by one line. And of course, as this transaction must be reported in two books, in this specific book that they name Comunitaria Intra-Community Transactions, and in the specific book for invoices issued and invoices received, we send this transaction also to the main path of the workflow. So we will have not only the invoices issued and received in this spreadsheet, but as well the movement of own goods, depending whether it's input or output. And finally, we create the output file based on our template. We fill in the header spreadsheet, the invoices received spreadsheet, the invoices issued spreadsheet, the certain intra-community transaction spreadsheet. And once the file has been built, we send by FTP to our server. And finally, we move to another folder that's to mark us, to flag as it has been processed. So let's run. Now it's connecting to our SharePoint. So the files are appearing here. So it has been downloaded from our SharePoint. And now it's uploading to our server by FTP. So here, as you can see, the workflow has been run and finished. And here, let me show you, for example, we can see in our FTP server, these two output files. It will take from 2 to 5 minutes to process these files. So maybe to sort these actions, I can show you here. If we enter to our tool, we can see, for example, I tested before, these files has been set, are the same files. You will see here that the files have been sent by FTP channel, the files built based on your data. You can continue doing anything else, etc. And the output files will be here, moved from the output folder to this process folder. So, yeah. So, well, what we do in Maros, we do multi-company invoicing and VAT compliance. We also do global VAT reporting. We have governance and control. So we are offering, according to these services, ETL services with Alteryx as part of our VAT compliance portfolio, with the aim of helping our clients transition to VAT compliance tools by automating the process, reducing risk, and minimizing manual work. Therefore, our clients will be able to allocate their time to tasks with higher added value.